The Cursed Camera. Jack Thompson had always been fascinated by vintage cameras. As a freelance photographer in New York City, he prided himself on his eclectic collection of photographic equipment. But nothing could have prepared him for the sinister nature of his latest acquisition. It was a dreary Tuesday afternoon when Jack stumbled upon Timeless Treasures, a quaint antique shop tucked away in a forgotten corner of Brooklyn. The shop's window display caught his eye. A pristine Leica 3 from the 1930s, its brass and black paint gleaming despite its age. The bell above the door chimed as Jack entered. The musty scent of old books and polished wood filled his nostrils. Dim light filtered through dusty windows, casting long shadows across cluttered shelves. The shop seemed to exist in a bubble of timelessness, disconnected from the bustling city outside. "Can I help you?" a raspy voice called out. Jack turned to see an elderly man emerge from behind a towering bookcase. His wrinkled face was partially hidden beneath a scraggly white beard, and his eyes seemed to hold secrets from a bygone era. The man's gnarled hands trembled slightly as he approached, a silver pocket watch dangling from his vest. "That camera in the window?" Jack began, his excitement palpable. "Is it for sale?" The old man's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something, was it fear, crossing his features. "Ah, the Leica. A fine piece indeed. But are you sure it's what you want?" Jack nodded eagerly, already reaching for his wallet. "I've been looking for one just like it for years. It's in incredible condition." The shopkeeper hesitated, his fingers drumming on the countertop. A heavy silence fell over the shop, broken only by the soft ticking of numerous clocks. "Very well," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I must warn you, this camera has a history." Jack chuckled, dismissing the old man's ominous tone. "Don't they all?" "That's what makes them special." As the shopkeeper carefully wrapped the camera, Jack couldn't help but notice how his hands shook, how he seemed reluctant to touch the Leica more than necessary. But in his excitement, Jack chalked it up to the man's advanced age. "Take care, young man," the shopkeeper said, as Jack turned to leave. "And remember, every photograph captures more than just light and shadow. Sometimes it captures essence." As he left the shop, camera in hand, Jack failed to notice the worried look that crossed the old man's face, or how quickly the "open" sign in the window flipped to "closed" behind him. Over the next few days, Jack was inseparable from his new acquisition. He took it everywhere, capturing candid shots of New Yorkers going about their daily lives. There was something exhilarating about using film again, the anticipation of waiting to see how the photos turned out. It wasn't until he developed the first roll that Jack noticed something odd. In every picture, the subjects' faces were slightly blurred, as if shrouded in a fine mist. At first, he attributed it to user error or perhaps some quirk of the vintage lens. But as he continued to shoot and develop, the effect persisted. Stranger still were the phone calls that began to trickle in. "Mr. Thompson?" a somber voice asked one morning. "This is the superintendent of your building. I'm afraid I have some bad news about your neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins." Jack's blood ran cold as he listened to the details. Mrs. Jenkins, the kindly widow from 4B, had passed away in her sleep. The cause was undetermined. With trembling hands, Jack pulled out the stack of recent photos. There, in the third image, was Mrs. Jenkins. Her face was blurred like all the others, but now the effect seemed ominous, almost like a portent of what was to come. As the days wore on, the pattern became unmistakable. Every person Jack photographed met with some terrible fate within 48 hours. A businessman struck by a taxi, a young mother who suffered a fatal allergic reaction, a teenager who drowned during a school trip. Panic-stricken, Jack tried to destroy the camera. He smashed it against the sidewalk, threw it into the East River, even tried to burn it in his fireplace. But each morning, he would wake to find it sitting on his bedside table, unscathed and gleaming in the pale light of dawn, as if mocking his futile attempts. The camera's presence began to consume Jack's every waking moment. He covered all the mirrors in his apartment, afraid to catch even a glimpse of his own reflection. He stopped answering his phone, terrified of hearing about another death he had inadvertently caused. Desperate for answers, Jack returned to the antique shop. But Timeless Treasures was gone, replaced by a boarded-up storefront with a weathered "For Lease" sign in the window. It was as if the shop had never existed, a figment of his imagination. Sleepless nights turned into weeks as Jack became a recluse, terrified of accidentally capturing someone's image and sealing their fate. Dark circles formed under his eyes, and his once steady hands now shook constantly. He covered every reflective surface in his apartment, paranoid that even a glimpse of his own reflection might trigger the camera's deadly power. But fate, it seemed, had one final cruel twist in store. On a gray, rainy morning, Jack's phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number. For a moment, he considered ignoring it, but something compelled him to answer. "Hello?" he answered, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Jack Thompson?" A familiar, raspy voice inquired. "This is Dr. Mortimer from New York Presbyterian. I'm calling about the results of your recent tests." Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He hadn't been to a doctor in months. How could they have test results? "I'm afraid I have some difficult news," Dr. Mortimer continued, his tone grave. "We've detected an aggressive form of cancer. It's unlike anything we've seen before. I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson, but without immediate treatment, I'm afraid you only have weeks to live." The doctor's words faded into a dull roar as Jack's gaze fell upon the Leica, sitting innocently on his coffee table. With trembling hands, he picked it up and turned it towards himself. In the viewfinder, he saw his own face, blurred and indistinct, already fading like a photograph left too long in the sun. The camera clicked. Weeks later, a "For Rent" sign appeared in the window of Jack's apartment. As potential tenants toured the space, they couldn't help but notice the vintage camera displayed prominently on the mantel. "Oh, what a beautiful piece!" one woman exclaimed, reaching out to touch it. The realtor smiled, a glint of something unreadable in his eyes. "It comes with the apartment," he said smoothly. "The previous tenant insisted it stay here, said it was meant for someone special." As the couple discussed lease terms, neither noticed the slight movement of the camera's lens, focusing silently on their unsuspecting faces. Click. Detective Sarah Martinez stared at the caseboard, her brow furrowed in concentration. Over the past 6 months, a series of unexplained deaths had swept through the city, each victim seemingly unrelated to the next. The only common thread? A vintage camera found at each scene. "What do we know about the original owner?" she asked her partner, Detective Mike Reeves. Reeves flipped through his notes, the rustle of paper filling the quiet precinct. "Guy named Jack Thompson, freelance photographer. Died of a rare, aggressive cancer about 7 months ago. No family, no close friends. Landlord said he became a recluse in his final weeks." Martinez tapped a photo on the board. "And this shop where he allegedly bought the camera? Timeless Treasures. No record of it ever existing. We've got statements from a few people who remember seeing it, but the address has been vacant for years, according to city records." A chill ran down Martinez's spine as she examined the crime scene photos. In each one, the Leica sat innocently, its lens reflecting the camera flash like a knowing wink. "There's something we're missing," she muttered, leaning in closer to study the images. As her face neared the glossy surface of one photo, she could have sworn she saw the reflection shift, the camera's lens turning ever so slightly towards her. Martinez jerked back, blinking rapidly. "Did you see that?" she asked Reeves, her heart pounding. Her partner looked up from his notes, confused. "See what?" She shook her head, trying to clear it. Nothing. Never mind. Let's call it a night. As they gathered their things to leave, neither detective noticed the small, antique camera sitting on a shelf in the evidence locker, its lens following their movements with mechanical precision. In the darkened precinct, a soft, barely audible sound echoed through the empty halls. Click. The curse of the camera lived on, its hunger for souls far from satiated. And as the city slept, unaware of the danger lurking in the shadows, the next chapter of its deadly story was about to unfold. Detective Martinez couldn't shake the feeling of unease as she drove home that night. The case had gotten under her skin in a way no other had before. As she walked into her apartment, she found herself checking over her shoulder, half expecting to see that damned camera lurking in the corners. She poured herself a glass of wine, hoping to calm her nerves. But as she raised the glass to her lips, she caught sight of her reflection in the window. For a split second, her face seemed blurred, indistinct. The wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. Somewhere in the city, a camera clicked, and another soul was marked for death.